What's one family saying or phrase you heard growing up that still sticks with you?
Are you ready for a shocking truth? Yesterday, my mother apologized with tea for forgetting my birthday again. I thanked her, smiled, and casually slid my cup across the table toward my sister, the one who got Paris, and within 2 sips she was coughing so hard she had to grip the counter for balance. My mother's eyes darted straight to me, and I swear for a moment her entire act cracked because she realized I had just called her bluff without saying a word. I sat there with my own glass of water, calm, steady, and waiting. I need to explain how we even got to that moment, because if you just hear the tea story by itself, it sounds dramatic, almost like a scene from some thriller, but the truth is it was just the latest page in a very long book. My birthdays have never really belonged to me. As a kid, the day was often forgotten until late at night when suddenly a store-bought cake would appear with a single candle and an excuse about how busy things were. Later it turned into, "Oh, I thought you didn't care about birthdays," or "I'll make it up to you this weekend." And somehow it always aligned with a new ask: co-sign this loan, spot me some cash, help with this bill, or just sign this one little form. You would think I am exaggerating, but I can look back and match almost every missed birthday with a moment where I was needed as the reliable one who would keep the peace and quietly fix something. This year, when I walked in and saw the kettle already steaming, I did not feel touched. I felt suspicious. Because the tea has become a ritual too. It is always a slightly different blend, but always just strong enough to make me feel off balance, relaxed, or tired, depending on what she wants. Not poisoned, not deadly, just enough that I soften, that my no gets shaky, and that my name ends up attached to something I never really wanted. Most people would laugh at the idea of someone slipping extra-strength chamomile into your cup as a power move, but when you add it up over years, it's manipulation with a smile. So when she put down that cup with an "I'm sorry I forgot, sweetheart," I felt the same twist in my stomach I always do. Not guilt, not sadness, but recognition. And that's when I looked over at Lauren, glowing with her Paris tan, showing off photos of croissants and little boutiques, and I thought, why not? I swapped the cups with a smile, and Lauren, not even noticing, lifted it to her lips like she always does when Mom hands her something. 2 sips in, her face turned, she started hacking, grabbing for a napkin, and for a moment I wondered if I had gone too far. But then I saw the box on the counter, Sleep Blend with eucalyptus oil, and I realized it was just another careless experiment. Not enough to kill anyone, but enough to choke if you weren't expecting it. The look on my mother's face said everything. She wasn't concerned for Lauren the way you'd expect. She was calculating, assessing, realizing that the little trick she thought she had mastered had just been exposed in front of everyone. I didn't need to say a word. I just sipped my water and let the silence stretch. Lauren waved it off as nothing, said maybe the tea was too strong, and Mom jumped in with her usual, "Oh dear, I must have misread the instructions, you know me, always rushing." But I already saw the real story in the corner of the kitchen, a plain brown envelope with my name on the top, the kind she always pulls out after softening me with apologies. And I thought, not this time. When I left that night, I didn't confront anyone, I didn't make a speech, I didn't play the dramatic sister. I just quietly took photos of the envelope, the tea box, and the dosing instructions, even the clock on the stove showing the exact time. Because I already knew where this was heading, and this time, I wanted proof. That night, when I got home, I sat down with my laptop and pulled up my credit report. It was something I had been meaning to do for months, but always avoided, because honestly, it felt easier not to know. But after that tea stunt, I realized that ignorance was just another tool she counted on. And when I opened the report, my stomach dropped. There it was, a shiny new account with purchases that had no connection to me, but lined up perfectly with the dates Lauren was in Paris. Airport vendors, luxury shops, restaurants, all in a city I had never set foot in. And the account? Opened under my name, with my social. I sat there staring at the screen, not shocked, because part of me had always known, but more like finally catching the shadow you felt behind you for years. And then I saw the signature on the application. It was mine. Or at least, it was supposed to be. The handwriting looked just enough like mine that a casual glance would have passed it through. Except I knew better. I don't curl my letters that way. That was the moment I realized the coughing wasn't the story. The coughing was the warning shot. The real story was buried in numbers and documents and years of oops, I forgot. And that's when I started planning. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't going to clean it up quietly. That night I froze my credit, locked down my reports, and set fraud alerts across every bureau I could. It was tedious, annoying, and exhausting, but for the first time, I wasn't doing it because I felt forced. I was doing it because I wanted to see what happened when she hit a wall instead of a sponge. I sat back, exhausted, but strangely calm, and thought, this is just the beginning. Because if the Paris trip was sitting on my name, then what else was out there waiting for me to discover? And I already knew I wasn't going to be the only one drinking from that cup anymore. When I woke up the next morning, I still had that heavy, unsettled feeling in my stomach, the kind that tells you something has already gone too far and there is no turning back, because once you have seen the truth, pretending not to see it anymore is impossible. And so I sat down with my coffee and opened the credit report again, line by line, transaction by transaction, and the pattern jumped out at me in a way that made my hands shake even though I had prepared myself for this. The Paris trip was sitting right there, itemized down to airport duty-free perfume, small cafes in neighborhoods I had only ever seen on TV, boutique shops with receipts that matched the exact dates my sister had been uploading pictures of herself under the Eiffel Tower and at the Louvre. And while she had been smiling and writing, "Thank you, Grandma, for making this dream possible," I had been unknowingly footing the entire bill under my own name. I wanted to scream, but instead I did what I have always done when life throws me into a wall. I started documenting, because I have learned that emotions mean nothing when the people around you are experts at twisting every word, but receipts, screenshots, and paper trails have a way of silencing all the noise, and so I pulled every single image I had from that kitchen the night before. I lined them up with the credit transactions, and I realized this wasn't a one-time mistake or some innocent mix-up. This was a system, a method, a habit, and I had been cast as the invisible funder for years. The worst part wasn't even the money. It was the betrayal of realizing that my sister, who has always been the fun one, the easy one, the one people root for, had looked me in the eye, gushed about her trip, and never once asked herself how it was paid for, never wondered why Grandma's so-called gift only extended to her, and never questioned the story my mother had clearly handed her, because it was easier to believe the pretty version than to confront the ugly truth. So I tested her. I sent a casual message, "Hey, just curious, how did you cover the trip? Was it all from Grandma?" And she sent me back a heart emoji and a cheerful yes, Grandma's gift. Wasn't that sweet of her? And for a second I thought maybe she really didn't know. I sent her one screenshot, the store card opened in my name, and her response shifted instantly from cheerful to panicked, with questions like, "What are you saying? Are you accusing me?" And my answer was simple, measured, and deliberate. I am not accusing. I am just showing you what I found. But the truth was, I already knew who was behind it, because this was the same pattern I had seen for years, the same hand that borrowed my college savings, the same voice that once left me a voicemail admitting she had used my fund for family needs, and would replace it later, the same person who had always smiled while rearranging the chessboard to keep herself in control. I gathered everything, and for the first time in my life I did not keep it private. I did not swallow the anger and let it rot inside me. I put it all in the family group chat, every screenshot, every timestamp, every line of credit activity. Even a clip of that old voicemail, and I let the silence do the work. There was no speech, no rage, no threats, just a row of receipts lined up so neatly that even the most stubborn denials would not hold. Lauren's panic grew, and she sent me private messages begging me not to drag her into this, insisting she had no idea, and maybe she truly didn't. Maybe she just took the Paris trip at face value, but her comfort was bought with my name, my credit, and my future, and I was done carrying the cost of other people's comfort. My mother's response was the same script she always used. "You're taking this the wrong way. You always imagine the worst. You never see how much I do for you." And I almost laughed, because it was so predictable, so rehearsed, so empty, and this time, I didn't even answer her directly. I just sent one more file, a bank folder from Aunt Rosa, who had confirmed to me that Grandma's gift had been split for both of us, that there was never supposed to be one chosen child, and that someone had conveniently rewritten history to funnel the benefit into a single direction. The moment I dropped that into the chat, Lauren went quiet, Mom went defensive, and Aunt Rosa chimed in with a comment that made my chest feel lighter than it had in years. I always wondered why Emily never got her share, and now it makes sense. That single sentence, from someone who remembered the truth, carried more weight than anything I could have said, because suddenly it wasn't just me holding up the evidence, it was family history itself contradicting my mother's carefully curated narrative. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to demand. I just drew a line. Going forward, nothing gets my signature without my written consent in advance, and any attempt to use my name without it will be treated as fraud. It was calm, it was final, and it was undeniable. For the first time, I wasn't playing defense. I was setting the terms. And just when I thought the storm might die down for a moment, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end introduced themselves as the fraud department from my bank, and they asked me one simple question that froze me in place. Did you recently request to change the contact email on your profile? In that instant, I knew this wasn't over. This wasn't even close to over. It was just beginning, and if the Paris trip was only the surface, then whatever they had tried to cover with that email change was going to make everything so far look small. And as I hung up, I realized I wasn't scared anymore. I was ready. When the fraud department asked if I had changed my contact email, I felt a rush of adrenaline that made my whole body go cold, because while I had prepared myself for manipulation, guilt trips, and even financial betrayals, the idea that someone had gone as far as to impersonate me directly with my own bank felt like stepping into a different territory altogether, one that could no longer be brushed aside as family misunderstandings or just mistakes, but instead had to be treated for what it was: deliberate fraud carried out by someone who believed they would never be caught. I told the representative that I had not authorized any change and that the email they had on record was not mine. And the man's tone shifted from polite to serious as he explained that my account had been flagged because the new contact address had already bounced back undeliverable, which often happened when someone tried to reroute communications but made a sloppy error in the process. That phone call snapped me into full alert, and instead of crumbling into confusion or begging for explanations, I did something I had never dared to do before. I opened an official identity theft case with the bank, requested mailed documentation of the incident, and demanded that every note be recorded under my profile so that if anyone attempted to speak on my behalf, they would immediately hit a wall. It was exhausting, it was overwhelming, and yet it was also liberating, because for the first time I wasn't just reacting emotionally, I was leaving behind a paper trail that couldn't be erased with a clever excuse or rewritten history. Later that day, I reached out to Dr. Patel, my therapist, who had been helping me for years untangle the mess of boundaries in my family. I didn't want sympathy, and I didn't need long conversations about healing in that moment. What I wanted was a short, neutral letter that stated in clear terms that I had been subjected to repeated financial coercion from family members, and that I had established a plan to avoid any further involvement in shared financial agreements. It wasn't about making my mother look bad in the eyes of an outsider. It was about having one more piece of objective proof to put into a folder that was quickly becoming my shield, because the older I get, the more I realize that stories can be dismissed as drama, but paperwork commands attention. While I was gathering all of this, my old high school friend Mark, who now worked in banking, gave me a crash course on how add-on cardholders and digital mail updates could be used to create the illusion that someone else was managing their own accounts, when in reality they were just piggybacking off another person's credit. He explained step by step how dates and amounts could line up to appear legitimate if you weren't looking closely, and his advice confirmed something I had already suspected. The Paris trip wasn't the first time this had happened. It was just the first time I had connected the dots. That night, I logged into my MyChart medical portal because a nagging thought had been scratching at the back of my mind, and what I saw there made my skin crawl. There was a refill request for a sedating medication I had taken years ago during college. a medication that I had stopped long ago, yet somehow it had been ordered again under my name just a few weeks back. I thought about the tea, the eucalyptus oil, the sleep blends, and suddenly the connection became impossible to ignore. Maybe it wasn't poison, maybe it wasn't meant to knock me out completely, but there was a clear attempt to soften me, to weaken me, to keep me compliant. Seeing that request sitting in my file, stamped with my identity, felt like crossing into a zone where health, finance, and trust had all been violated at once, and it terrified me to imagine what else I hadn't yet discovered. Lauren called me crying that evening, swearing that she had no idea any of this was happening, that Mom had told her the money for Paris was hers to use guilt-free, that everything was a gift from family savings, and she begged me not to push this any further because it would ruin everything. I listened, I really did, but I couldn't unsee what I had already seen, and while part of me believed her tears, another part of me knew she had grown comfortable in the role of beneficiary. Comfortable enough to never ask hard questions as long as she was the one holding the shopping bags and boarding passes. So I made my next move carefully, deliberately, and without apology. I filed an official police report, not because I wanted to see my mother arrested, but because I wanted a number on record that I could hand to the bank, to HR at my job, to any institution that needed proof that I wasn't the one playing games with my accounts. I printed every page, signed every form, and mailed certified letters to my mother's address stating clearly that any attempt to use my name, my social, or my signature without me physically present would be treated as fraud. It wasn't a threat, it wasn't a plea, it was a line drawn in black and white. 2 days later, my phone buzzed with a photo message from my mother. She was sitting in a lawyer's office, smiling like she had won a prize, holding up a stack of papers with a caption that said, "It will be easier if you just sign." I stared at that photo for a long time, not angry, not shocked, but strangely calm, because what she didn't know is that I had already built a wall higher than any piece of paper could climb. I typed out one sentence in response, nothing more, nothing less. "I will see you there, with someone." And in that moment, I realized the balance had shifted for good. For once, I wasn't walking into her world alone, ready to be cornered. This time, I would have my own stack of papers, my own proof, my own witness. This time, it would be her turn to explain. Walking into that lawyer's office felt like stepping into a theater where every character already knew their lines except me. But for the first time in my life, I wasn't there to play the role of the quiet daughter who nods along and signs whatever is placed in front of her. I had come armed with a folder so thick it barely fit into my bag, and a witness sitting beside me who understood exactly how these games worked, because I knew if I walked in alone the story would twist, the words would bend, and by the time I left the room I would somehow be the unreasonable one again. The lawyer, a man in his 50s with a neutral face, shuffled his papers and cleared his throat, sliding across the table a draft deed transfer that would, in one stroke of ink, move Grandma's bungalow fully into my mother's name with nothing but a vague promise to add me later, and even though I had anticipated something like this, seeing it spelled out in legal print made my stomach clench with the weight of how far she was willing to go. I didn't shout or accuse, because drama feeds her, and I wasn't about to give her fuel. Instead, I laid out my own stack of papers, one by one, like cards in a game she thought only she knew how to play. There was the credit report showing the Paris purchases, the bank record with the fraudulent email change, the MyChart printout with the refill request for medication I hadn't touched in years, and the certified police report acknowledging identity theft tied directly to my name. I placed them in order, deliberate and calm, and then I sat back while Mark, my friend who had agreed to sit as my witness, asked 3 simple but devastating questions. Did Emily consent to this transaction in writing? Did she receive any direct communication about this transfer before today? And does she stand to benefit equally from what was originally hers by right of inheritance? The silence that followed said more than any outburst could, because for once my mother's performance wasn't met with nods and sighs, it was met with the cold reality of evidence stacked against her. Lauren was there too, shifting uncomfortably in her chair, caught between the sister who had always been the reliable scapegoat and the mother who had always treated her like the chosen one. She mumbled a half-hearted apology, saying she didn't know the details. She just thought things were being handled fairly, and she asked if maybe we could all just keep this quiet so it didn't spread through church and neighbors. Her words made me want to laugh, not out of cruelty, but out of sheer disbelief, because the idea that the biggest concern was gossip rather than the fact that my identity had been hijacked told me everything I needed to know about where her priorities still lay. I turned to my mother and, in the calmest voice I could muster, I told her that this wasn't about embarrassment or forgiveness, it was about safety, respect, and trust. 3 things that had been stripped from me one paper at a time over years of misunderstandings and oversights. Then I slid across the table my own document, a simple agreement that outlined 2 clear demands, a repayment plan to restore my portion of Grandma's gift that had been diverted without my knowledge, and a no-contact clause regarding any financial matter tied to my name. I didn't ask for her approval. I didn't beg for her to acknowledge the truth. I just placed it in front of her as a condition of continued relationship, because if she couldn't honor that, then we were done playing house as if everything was fine. The lawyer's face stayed neutral, but I could see in his eyes that he knew the weight of what was happening, that this wasn't just another family squabble over inheritance, but a deeper fracture in which one person had spent years controlling and extracting from another under the guise of maternal love. My mother tried to shift back to her well-rehearsed script, talking about sacrifice, about how much she had done for us, about the countless invisible hours she had poured into raising children alone. But I stopped her cold by laying down a printed copy of the voicemail she had once left me, the one where she admitted she had borrowed my college savings for family needs and would replace it someday. The sound of her own voice on paper, transcribed in black and white, cut through every excuse she tried to muster, and for the first time in a long time, she had nothing to say. When the meeting ended, I didn't sign a single line of her deed transfer, and I walked out with my head high, my witness beside me, and my evidence folder heavier than when I walked in. Because now it contained not only the proof of what had been done to me, but also the proof that I had finally refused to play along. That night, as if to reassert control in the only way she still could, my mother posted a smiling family photo online with a caption about choosing forgiveness, and tagged me in it, painting herself as the saintly figure willing to overlook her daughter's harshness. But instead of feeling cornered by her performance, I simply took a screenshot, documented the post as one more piece of evidence in the story she was so desperate to rewrite, and pressed a single button to turn her caption into proof of the manipulation I had been living under for years. Because what she didn't realize was that her need to control the narrative had just handed me another receipt, another weapon in my growing arsenal, and this time, I wasn't going to let it slip quietly into the past. I lay in bed that night knowing one thing with absolute clarity. The battle was no longer about teacups, birthdays, or even Paris trips. It was about reputation, truth, and who got to tell the story. And for the first time, it wasn't going to be her. The morning after my mother tried to launder the story with that shiny caption about forgiveness, I woke to a phone buzzing itself off the nightstand with messages from relatives, neighbors, and people I barely remember from childhood church telling me how proud they were that we were working it out, and while a version of me from a few years ago would have swallowed the praise and tried to make the performance real by smoothing everything over, the person I am now simply took a breath. Opened the bank email confirming that my contact information had been restored and the add-on card closed, filed the screenshot into my folder labeled Stability, and realized that the most powerful answer I could give the world was not a counterpost or a dramatic speech, but a steady sequence of actions that returned control of my life to me in ways that no caption could undo. I met Lauren at a quiet place where no one would eavesdrop, and before she could spin into apologies or explanations that would only tie us in knots, I told her that I loved her, and I believed she had not set out to hurt me. Yet love did not require me to carry the weight of choices that benefited her while billing me, and since she was the direct recipient of the trip that sat on my credit, the fairest path forward was simple. She could help unwind it by asking the airline for the receipt. history tied to her booking. She could request the merchant statements that matched her travel dates, and she could co-sign the repayment agreement with Mom, so the responsibility followed the benefit. Because I was done paying for joy I did not consume and for stories I did not write. She cried the way people cry when the air goes out of a party and the bill lands with their name on it, and even though I softened enough to pass her tissues and remind her that repair was possible and that I was not asking for punishment, but for honesty, I did not back away from the plan, since plans are the only things that survive the gravitational pull of old habits, and in my family, old habits are the strongest force in the room. With that conversation done, I drove to a place I had circled on my phone months earlier when I still thought of dreams as pictures you save for later. A modest condo with nothing flashy about it except the fact that it was clean, affordable, and entirely mine if the bank said yes, and because my reports were locked and the fraudulent accounts were flagged with a case number that I could recite from memory, the approval moved forward without the little traps that had always snagged me in the past. So a few weeks later, after more signatures than I thought possible and more explanations than any reasonable person should need to provide, I stood in an office with Aunt Rosa by my side, signed the final document, and let the keys press an unfamiliar indentation into my palm, which, to me, felt like the first honest mark my own life had left on my own skin in a very long time. I did not invite my mother to the closing because closing a door is sometimes the only way to open a life, yet I sent her one calm email that afternoon with a copy of a therapy appointment already scheduled. A short note stating that if she wanted a relationship with me, it would happen in that room with a list of boundaries in plain language and no talk of forgiveness as a replacement for restitution, and while I knew there was a chance she would ignore it, I also knew that the point of the invitation was not to save the past, but to protect the future, and if she declined, then the truth would have simply done its last necessary job, which is to separate what can be saved from what cannot. Predictably, she called with the same speech I have heard since I could drive, a monologue about sacrifice and family and doing what needs to be done, but I interrupted with the one sentence that stops the carousel every time it starts to spin, telling her that family does not move the line and call it love, and because I refused to step onto the ride, the music cut out and the room went quiet, and in that quiet I felt something inside me unclench in a way that had nothing to do with victory over another person and everything to do with finally keeping a promise to myself. To mark the end of the old story without starting a new performance, I posted exactly one thing, a cropped screenshot from the bank showing that control of my account had been restored to me. No anger, no parade, no lecture, just the words, "I took care of it," and you would not believe how quickly the narrative in our family flipped from "Emily is dramatic" to "Emily is done," because when you stop auditioning for the role of the reasonable one, people learn that the show is over and the tickets are no longer on sale. In the weeks that followed, the repayment plan landed in my inbox with signatures where they needed to be. The fraudulent email change was coded as part of a closed case, and the Paris balance migrated off my name and back to the source where it belonged. While my mother, unable to resist the reflex to look benevolent, tried once more to post a cheerful update about healing, which I quietly archived into the evidence folder without a second thought, because my life was no longer a stage and she was no longer my director, and the only audience that mattered was the version of me who had spent years cleaning up messes in exchange for crumbs of approval and who now, finally, had a kitchen with a door she could close. I kept the cup, not because I wanted a trophy or because I am the kind of person who collects souvenirs from bad nights, but because every time I see it sitting on an ordinary shelf it reminds me that I am allowed to swap out anything I never agreed to drink, that I can reach for water when someone pushes something else into my hand, and that small decisions, repeated with intention, are the quiet gears that move a life from survival into ownership. And if you are wondering whether I blocked my mother or burned the bridge or delivered some grand speech that left everyone breathless, the answer is simpler and, to me, much better. I left the therapy appointment on the calendar with a time and a place. I told her I would sit down in that room with a notebook and a boundary list and a willingness to listen so long as money stayed out of our relationship and truth stayed in, and then I went home to a condo where my name on the deed matches my name on the mailbox, where the walls don't lean in at the smell of chamomile, and where I can pour myself a glass of water without checking the label twice, because whether she shows up or not is her story, and the part that matters most is already written, which is that I broke every rule that kept me small, I turned the tables without breaking a single law, and I won in the only way that actually counts, which is that I am free.